can only ask people to volunteer so much of their time to do terrible things. And so I said, when you fund this office properly, and we get a morgue, and we've got access to the things we need, I'll resign.
I'm talking with Jon Walker today. He's currently serving as a Bonneville County commissioner, but prior to that, he served as the county coroner for the same county. And we're excited to talk to him today about cases he was involved with and over the years. Jon, thanks for taking some time with me today.
You bet, glad to.
First of all, what years did you serve as coroner?
Started the process in 1999, was actually selected and sworn in the year 2000, served until 2012.
Any cases that stand out to you over the years?
Bonneville County is an extremely busy coroner's office, and that's because we have a regional medical center here. And so incidents that occur in Wyoming and Montana that are then flown to Idaho Falls for the advanced care that they have here, and then they pass away at our hospital, those become the Bonneville County coroner's case, even though the accident occurred in Montana or Wyoming. And with our proximity to the park, we get a lot of cases from the park that come down, which means a lot of foreign nationals. And one was a member of the royal family in Saudi Arabia and passed away at the hospital here. So I was dealing with not just investigating his death that occurred in another state, but dealing with the U.S. consulate and the Secretary of State and the royal family in Saudi Arabia to try and do things that would expedite their getting the body of their relative back home for a funeral, which in their standards is a whole different timeline than ours. In 2021, I started looking at reports, and we were having 9 deaths a month in Bonneville County from multiple prescription drug overdoses. Usually there were opiates involved. There were some classifications of drugs that were always there, but you could do the math and see that somebody who has this illness gets this prescription, which has this side effect, so they get this prescription, which has this side effect, so they get another prescription. And they're getting prescriptions to treat side effects of medications. And you have to talk to a pharmacist to really understand how those all tie together. And you put all of those in a body, and then the individual drinks a couple of beers and they're dead. Or they take cold medicine and they're dead. And that was happening the average 9 times a month. So I started going around. After I'd investigate one of these, I'd go around to all the doctors that had written prescriptions that were in the mix that had caused this death. And I'd have a heart-to-heart with the doctor about what you're doing seems like it's a good thing, but it killed this guy and left a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old and a mother with no job. And it's a consequence of the medications that you were prescribing. It's a drug interaction. So things started to change. We worked with the State Board of Medicine, Board of Pharmacy. They came out with a system for doctors to be able to see with an email exchange what medication somebody was on.
Bizarre murder cases seem to be a thing people are very interested in. I don't know if you ever investigated something like that, but do you have a case that was particularly unusual?
There was a young mother died at the hospital, and they didn't know why she died. And eventually they, I think, signed it out as systemic, but they don't get to do that. And it got caught and kicked over to me. So we started an actual death investigation, and everything about where she was found and how she and what put her in the hospital, and started working backwards and did some really definitive blood work and discovered that she had markers in her blood that indicated strong indication that she died of a heavy metal overdose. Okay, so like mercury poisoning or lead poisoning or one of the other little heavy metals that can be absorbed or ingested, and over time get enough to kill you. So I think she was a school teacher. It's not likely, but her husband worked at a facility where he had access to all of those things, and they were in the process of going through an ugly divorce.
Oh,
So it's like, okay. And before the information had come to me, because she was at the hospital and was seeing the prime candidate, they had sent her organs to 7 other folks. So they'd done organ transplants in her lungs and heart and kidneys and liver, and when you do that, there's 7, sometimes 9 lives that can be saved by one life if it's all orchestrated correctly. So now we're looking at, okay, so if this were the case, then they passed on heavy metal poisoning to 7 people that are already in a critical status, right? Because by the time you get to an organ transplant, usually your system's not doing too well. So they're at-risk patients. So we went through the process of finding out where those people were scattered across the country. At the same time, we were doing more in-depth look at the blood chemistry. And it turns out she had a really rare infection that caused the same toxin that heavy metals produce. So instead of giving 7 people heavy metal poisoning, they gave them a fatal infection that would grow in their system and would kill them. Contacted all of the facilities where those 7 patients were, and they started treating the infection, and all of them got cured before they had any problems occur.
yeah.
No, that was one of the strangest. One of the most difficult cases was an officer-involved shooting that occurred in Idaho Falls. It was the Bonneville County Sheriff's deputies that had chased this guy. They had multiple felony warrants on him. They'd been trying for a long time. Car chase and wrecked cars, and then chased him into a house, and three or 4 officers went into the house behind the guy, and they're like right behind him, and he goes in, comes back out into the hallway just as one of the officers gets to the door, and then gunfire erupts. And so you've got initially 3 officers shooting pistols and the bad guy shooting his gun, and rebuilding that crime scene, that death scene, becomes really important, because you have to know which bullets came from which guns and the order that they came, the order that happened in. All of the officers were shooting 10 millimeters, I think, except one. And he was shooting a 45 cylinder gun. They were all shooting semi-automatics. And he shot his a couple of times, and then shot himself in the neck while he was falling, being tackled by the police officer. Don't know if he meant to shoot himself so he wouldn't, or if the gun just ended up in the middle of the wrestling match and shot him, but it was his own bullet. As a coroner, you see a lot of really bad stuff, and it's important to be able to compartmentalize that stuff in its place and leave it there. And really, it's the only way to stay happy and healthy, I think.
What ultimately made you decide to step down?
Well, I actually, when I threw my hat in the ring and was chosen by the Central Committee, my name was forwarded to the commissioners, who then picked me as the next coroner. My first meeting with them, I told Roger Christensen, said, I'm not here for a career. I am here because there's some things that I would like to see fixed in the coroner's office. We need to be brought up to date in how how we do things. Our commissioners had always given us enough money for autopsies, but it was hard to have them done because we didn't have a morgue. We didn't have access to a forensic pathologist. And the idea of making a family wait an extra 2 weeks because we don't have a system in place seems wrong. So the office was poorly funded. The coroner's salary when I took over the office was $3,000 a year. And if that's why the amount of time wasn't being spent. I mean, it's like you can only ask people to volunteer so much of their time to do terrible things. And so I said, when we fund this office properly, and we get a morgue, and we've got access to the things we need, I'll resign. And it took 11 years, and I resigned. We've got a great morgue in Idaho Falls, a great facility. We had access to a really good forensic pathologist and a good lab, and things were all lined out. And then the county's coroner's office bought that forensic pathologist and every other one we tried to get over here. And it's caused problems in this side of the state that one of the consequences of is the whole day bail case, which has cost millions of dollars for the counties involved. So through the education program that's coming to ISU, the forensics program, we'll have a forensic pathologist on this side of the state, and we'll be back to being able to provide autopsies at our morgue or in Pocatello for all of the counties on this side, and the investigation process will be improved dramatically.